So, today we're going to be talking about something that some of you have been eagerly been waiting for. Today we're going to be talking about the King of War. It is, of course, the Battleship. Extremely expensive, extremely powerful, flexible, no. Good in a lot of situations, not really. Raw firepower, it's got plenty of it. We're going to be talking about these guys. Very late mid-game availability on these guys. You will be rocking around with cruisers for quite some time once these bad boys come onto the field. And they also pack some of the heaviest weapons within the game with various amounts of usefulness. We're going to be talking about XL weapons probably in a separate episode because we could be talking about those till the end of time. But still... Battleships. Let's go into our ship designer and take a look at what we have. We're going to be talking about 4 different types of battleships today. We're going to be talking about the starter battleship, the endgame carrier, the endgame battleship, and the pocket battleship. Now, the pocket battleship is probably not the best name for that particular design, and we'll go into that a little bit more later on. However, let's take a look at our starter battleship. Extremely straightforward. This is a carrier killer, or a carrier killer. Well, it could kill carriers. A cruiser killer, if anything. It's got a lot of kinetic batteries. It does quite a lot of damage to shields, a lot of damage to armor, very high damage from exceptionally large range, and is extremely expensive. 1,400 minerals right at the start, but does a gargantuan amount of damage. Basically, what happens with these bad boys is they stay as far away from the field of battle at the back of the line and just rain in artillery from the back. Very useful, particularly devastating towards cruisers because they will have difficulties hitting anything that is destroyers or below, and therefore being able to hit those cruisers and maybe some other early battleships is also very, very useful. Then let's go and take a look at something that you may want to work yourself into later on. Let's take a look at this pocket battleship design. I kind of threw this together yesterday because I didn't really know what to do with this because battleships in themselves are not all that flexible and also not all that useful in my opinion. I'd rather go with more cruisers than battleships because of their inherent flexibility. However, this is a relatively interesting design. It has a relative amount of flexibility. It uses whirlwind missiles, which are difficult to counter with point defense and flak. It's got medium plasma accelerators to take down enemy armor quite quickly, and also some bombers to take down enemy battleships. An interesting design, sure. Is it good? That's doubtful. I wouldn't spend the 1,400 minerals on this. I'd rather wait and buy 2 cruisers instead. And yeah, that is effectively it. I'm not all that impressed with battleships in the game. Initially, when the game first came out, there was an additional module slot right here, which allowed for the aura effects that you will now get with stations. So if we quickly go towards our fortress design, these aura effects were originally part of battleships, and they were extremely expensive, but oh so useful. Basically, battleships were designed to be extremely expensive and give buffs to any ships within their vicinity. So you could have, for instance, a battleship that generated a offensive aura or a defensive aura, or maybe even a fire rate negative or a nanobot cloud, basically allowing the battleship to be a little bit more flexible, because right now in this current design it sadly is just a giant platform with guns. Some of you may be really happy with that. You know, there's a lot of Bismarck fans out there, and this is effectively it. But the problem with battleships is, just like the Bismarck, it really shouldn't be on its own. It needs a lot of support. It's not really the core of your fleet because that's where the cruisers come in, but still relatively useful for high damage at long range. So let's go and take a look at something that's a little bit more interesting. Let's go and take a look at the endgame carrier. This is a design that I have played around with quite a lot. It is definitely an interesting one, as carriers themselves are not all that great within the context of the game. I could probably even swap these out for auto cannons in this particular case, just to use it as something to swap enemies away. But still, there is not really a dedicated carrier system within the game. Being able to just crank out 24 advanced bombers is incredibly useful, especially in combination with the cruisers that all have one wing of themselves. And effectively, this counts as a great way to counter enemy capital ships like other battleships, especially when it comes to these point defense systems. Enemy fighters will have a difficult time fighting this due to its flak artillery, as well as its general point defense, so missiles are not all that useful against it. And still, you may want to try it out. If it works for you, maybe it works for you. I don't really have all that much success with these. They are a fun idea, but still, and they look cool, I'm not gonna lie. But still, it's not all that great in my opinion. I'm generally like to fit my fleets out with maybe 2 or 3 of these in the late game, just to supplement the carriers a little bit, also as a end game support craft when destroyers are being knocked off the field left, right, and center, and it may work in that case, but still, it's not really a great design. Let's go and take a look at the big daddy of them all. Let's go and take a look at the Endgame Battleship with the Spinal Mount Bow. The Spinal Mount Bow is basically the only platform within the game that allows for the XL weapons. Now, there are some murmurings on the internet right now that XL weapons may be coming to stations, which would make total sense. Here's looking at you, Wiz. However, the Spinal Mount Bow has only 6 weapons available to it, and effectively it's only 3 because there's only 3 types, and each type has 2 subdirectories. But still, in the past, you would run around with ships with tachyon lances on everything. Why would you run around with tachyon lances on everything, ASpec? Well, before XL weapons were a thing, tachyon lances were large weapons, which meant that you could have something insane like nothing but larges in the highs, something like this, and this would all be tachyon lenses, which was insane. They were some of the most highest damage output weapons in the game's history. This was also back in the day when tachyon destroyers were a thing. But still, this is kind of like the pocket battleship or the initial starter battleship design, but with one big difference, and that is the Giga Cannon focus arc emitter or tachyon lens. Now, these are very scenario specific. I personally like to go for the Giga Cannon because it does 32% shield damage and ignores 50% of armor, so as once the shields are down, in combination with, say, the Corvette, Neutron Torpedoes, or the ship-of-the-line cruisers, that Giga Cannon is basically going to wreck anything in its path. And 50% of armor being ignored straight in the hull, that can be up from 60 to 175 damage right onto the hull, which is definitely not insignificant, especially if you have like a line of 20 of these. They'll knock anything on its ass relatively quickly. Tachyon lances ignores 90% of armor, minus 25% shield damage. Also very, very good if you are running something in parallel with the Corvettes. The Neutron Torpedo Corvettes, relatively decent accuracy, doesn't do a lot of shield damage. Of course, it does do a lot of shield damage, it just has reduced shield damage due to its weapons type. It ignores 90% of armor, which is rather nice. Focused Arc Emitter is one of the weirdest weapons in the games. I very, very rarely use it. It does relatively low damage, 1 to 221 damage. It can do either a lot or a little bit, which is always a little bit of an RNG situation there. The cooldown of 8.6 is also not the greatest. An accuracy of 100%, which means it will always hit. Tracking of 100% means it can hit any target, anytime. You want to shoot this bad boy at a Corvette and instantly pop it? Totally possible. Average damage, 12.9. It's so-so. Its range, 110. Yeah... It's not the longest range weapon. That's the Giga Cannon in combination with the kinetic artillery. Yeah, it's a good design, don't get me wrong. It definitely is a cruiser killer, and it can also really knock other battleships off their place. But still, it's not something that I would actively use within a fleet. Still, the ship of the line, for me, is the way to go. Regardless, we're going to go wrap it up here. And this has been a general overview of battleships. If you disagree with anything that I said or want to comment on anything, feel free to leave a comment below. I'm sure there's a lot of opinions out there on how to design your battleships. And some of you may feel that, hey, battleships are the king of battle, and I want to know more about them, and that's perfectly fine. Battleships are cool, and we should do a little bit more with them. And but right now, as of 1.9, they are not all that flexible, and cruisers are superior to them in almost every single scenario, and that's mostly because of their large cost. If you manage to knock one of them off the field, it's a significant damage reduction already, considering how much damage is centered onto one ship. But still, these are the things that we need to keep in mind. Thank you so much for watching. We're going to wrap it up here, as this has been an overview for battleships. And until next time, take good care of yourselves, and as always, each other.